advocate when Pat Brown was governor for uh, Californians with disabilities. So it's been my pleasure to have this wonderful relationship. And then for people who are joining us, Janessa is our new district director, our former district director. I just saw Chanel Scales Preston. I'm so proud of her. She was recently elected to the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors, and she's moved on to bigger and better things. And Janessa has the same problem I had when I went to Congress, when people told me I had big shoes to fill when I had to follow Congressman George Miller, who had been there for 40 years and had been the chair of the Education Committee of the United States House of Representatives. So with that, these are challenging times right now. Last week was a particularly difficult time when the majority passed a budget bill that now goes over to the Senate that I felt strongly against much of it. And the process was I felt strongly against as well because this is a massive budget. Can we increase efficiencies? Always. And I've had a long history of working at efficiencies coming from my days as a Republican small business owner. But this was not a thoughtful process and it didn't adhere to our process. And it passed by one vote. And now it goes over the Senate. We're hoping and anticipating that many of the most um, difficult things for communities that historically have been benefited and supported by Republicans and Democrats, that we'll have a chance to really more thoughtfully look at this. That will happen. The key date really is September 1st when our appropriations is set to run out. So the committee will start that process next week when we go back. This week we are often in the district. So I will say one thing about the bipartisan effort, and we'll talk about this more. A really key part of legislation was actually signed by President Gerald Ford, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. And the idea was, and it was bipartisan when President Ford signed it, that young people in America, all young people, based on my reading of history, Benjamin Franklin in particular, who was an advocate for the first public library and an advocate for the first for public schools, and as a son of a printer, at a time in this country with only 1% of the population could read and write. Franklin and his colleagues at the founding, but particularly Franklin, thought that as literacy grew, public education would be a key part of that, and of course, access to books, and that as more people were able to read and write, democracy would spread. And that's why these cuts to everyone is a real danger to democracy, I think. But also just thoughtful conversations between Republicans and Democrats that I always hope we'll come back to in these difficult times. So IDA signed by Gerald Ford, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that, and supported by Republicans and Democrats before and since then. So we're going to do a short PowerPoint, and then we'll turn it over to our two guests and go to questions. All right. So to begin with, I think we have to go back to the first. There we go. We're on the same page. Speaking of books. So that's the introduction. We'll go to the next page. This we have to always stay at the beginning and stick with me for a second. This is a government funded town hall. So I cannot do political issues on this. And I know it seems like one, government and politics goes hand in hand, but think about if I was campaigning and you're a Republican who's paying taxes for this, or in a colleague's district who's a Republican and Democrats are doing that. But as a ranking Democrat in the House Ethics Committee, of which I'm very proud of, and I work closely with the chair of the committee, Michael Guest from Mississippi, who the two of us run the committee. It's the only committee in the House that has equal representation of the majority and the minority party. So 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Michael does get to have the title of chair because he's in the majority party. But we have to just remind people that if I'm doing a town hall on my campaign side, I have free, very wide allowance for talking about anything. But when I'm on the government side, I have to be mindful that this is paid for by taxpayer funds, and that I have to try it as best I can to follow that line between campaigning and government work. Doesn't mean I can't express opinions from my perspective on the subject matter we're going to talk about. So that's just, I know it's a little hard to follow, but it's an important rule that we have that I support. And I'm required by House rules as the ranking member of the Ethics Committee to enforce it. I don't get to write them. Occasionally I do, but I have to enforce it. So with that, we'll go to, if you have any questions about that, let us know and we can give you the actual language. So this is our district. There are 435 House districts in the United States of America. I'm grateful to be able to represent one of them. I'm told only about 14,000 people in the history of the country has had the honor to be elected to Congress, and I am grateful for that experience. So most of Contra Costa and a little bit of Alameda. So we're at a time where we're very split as a country, and the Congress is reflective of that. However, I do feel we have a responsibility morally to work with people we disagree with, but we have to stand up to them when we see things, particularly this extreme, in my view. And I think it's extreme as demonstrated as the court's decisions, as a lot of these executive orders have been announced. There have been lawsuits filed against them. I'll get into that a little bit more. And the courts have upheld that 93% of the cases that we and our partners have brought up, the courts have found against the administration and for us, which means largely Democratic constituent groups and some Republicans who realize this is an erosion on the Constitution. Laws are passed in a way at the state, local, and federal level as part of the rules and part of our Constitution, where a majority generally rules, unless there are specific rules within the local government, the state government, or the federal government for what's called supermajorities. If you don't like a law, you have to start the process and go through and amend it or change it. There has been different views by different administrations about what executive authority they have and what executive administrative orders are. This particular president has pushed that to an extreme that constitutional and historians have said have been unlike any other, certainly in the modern era of this country and really in the history of the country, in my view. So on education, one of the first departments that was attacked, my words, was based on, I think, a lack of understanding of what the federal role is in education. This country was founded on diffused power. The federal had a role, but a lot of it was about local control, which my colleagues talk about on the other side when they disagree with us and overreach, and I would disagree with what they're doing now strongly and overreach. And as I said, the courts have found it with us. But the Department of Education specifically is roughly between 10 and 15% of the total funding in the United States. It comes from the federal government. And most of that goes to protect the civil rights of disadvantaged Americans, including special needs kids, who we'll talk more about, but anyone who the courts and the Congress have described that way. And as a senior member of the Education and Labor Committee, I feel very strongly about the role of the federal government and why the Department of Education at the federal level is important to get the services provided down to the local school in a way that's thoughtful and is constitutional. So I've been very active in trying to fight against all of these efforts. And there are things we can agree on, like I said, efficiency, but this is not the way we increase efficiency. So next. Those two bullets, I'm not going to go through each one, or we won't have any time for questions. So as usual in this, I'm going to run through the PowerPoint that's fairly dense and try to limit my comments so that we can get to the panelists and get to questions. For those of you who are viewing, these are available online, either on our website or in social media. All of our PowerPoints are. So again, some of the bills I have been to help with access, particularly Pell Grants. I'm very grateful that what I've done on higher education that this administration is attacking now came from meetings I had at the University of California in St. Mary's, Stanford, at CSU, um, uh, schools both here and around the country where access to these grants allowed people of merit, hard work, and talent to be able to apply to school and then to get the financing for it and to give more flexibility. So in high cost areas, one of the things I heard over and over again at the University of California, I met with these kids and have continued to because of its proximity and also because of its immense prestige around the world. Generally regarded as the number one public university in the country and the world by many estimations. A lot of kids who get great grades, work hard, and go to that school don't have enough money to get enough nutrition, so food hunger, college students, and then don't have housing in a high cost area. We now have examples of where some private sector venture capitalists have deliberately bought up property around college campuses, knowing that they've got a market there and then have raised the rent. So we're working on that. But Pell Grants, this bill allowed for more flexibility so that they could apply and qualify for not just tuition, but also for room and board, which includes access to food, but also access to affordable housing. Obviously, you can't do very well in school if you don't have basic elements of food and safe lodging. Um, I've offered a number of amendments, so the majority will carry a bill. If they won't, the Speaker has control in the Congress of what bills actually go to the Rules Committee, of which I was a member of for many years and was the vice chair. And then that committee reviews it and sends it what's called a committee of jurisdiction. These would go to the Education Committee of which I'm on, and if there's money involved, would go to Appropriations Committee. Um, this one I just offered would say that uh, the budget bill, if courts found against it, elements of it or totally, that there'd be amendment in the bill that would say the Secretary of Education would not go against what the court side, even something as simple as that, which should be self-evident. Uh, we all the Democrats voted for it, none of the Republicans voted for it. They all voted against it in spite of me engaging with Republican members, including the chair and other senior members. We'll go to the next one. So these are a number of bills that affect young people. I've been a proud advocate and acknowledged leader on mental health, but behavioral health, particularly for kids, but for everyone. My father committed suicide for many years. Off of that, I've become more interested in how our brain works, both in addiction and cognitive development. Since we are in the middle of, we're in Mental Health Month, so I've done a lot of work in this regard. It's really important that kids get the services they need, but also all this wonderful research that we've discovered, mostly in the last 30 or 40 years, and a lot of it from the University of California, specifically at San Francisco, where they have great research programs that are also being cut that identify the neuroscience of trauma and how we can be mindful, particularly of kids as their brains develop. That kids under stress don't develop in the same way that kids who don't have stress. That's not to say that challenges aren't part of life and that we work to overcome them, but we also know now that poverty and abuse affects our brain for the rest of our lives. So we have to protect young people as they go through that and adults afterwards. Um, so if you look on our newsletter, you can see what we're doing. A lot of people have told me we're not doing enough. I would agree with some of that, but we're working our tail off. And we didn't, my feeling is we underestimated um, what this administration, what our colleagues were going to do when they got the gavel and got the White House. We had to live through 4 very tough years, 2 in particular. So in the first Trump administration, the first 2 years, Republicans had the majority. That's when they passed the largest tax decrease on wealthy people. They've smartly politically given a lot of tax breaks, but the Congressional Budget Office has analyzed the bill and said that 85% of the benefit goes to the top 10%. Most of that goes to top 1%. So if you make over $7 million a year, this has been a tax cut right at the time when we have the greatest inequality in the history of the country, greater than the Gilded Age. So we've been fighting that. The courts uh, said that the closing of the Department of Education was illegal. I went down. I've demonstrated at the Department of Education with students from California and around the country, and I've led these efforts. And I'm very, very happy that the courts have said that what he did was illegal, and he cannot close the Department of Education or stop its grants. Next. So if you want to get in contact with us or have questions about what's in the PowerPoint or what I've said or anything really, please just ask your question now, or you feel free to send us an email. I will tell you that since January 20th, when this administration took place, my 15 employees in our 3 offices, Walnut Creek and Antioch here in DC, have gone from getting about 1,000 emails a week to getting over 5,000. So people are very engaged. But we encourage you to question us, and if you disagree with us, that's fine too. Sometimes I'm wrong, but let's do it civilly and respect that democracy is based on a respect for people who disagree with us. So some of the language right now in the last 3 weeks in those 5,000 plus emails and what we see online are really quite violent and discouraging to civil discourse in democracy, in my view. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Congressman. We are joined by Lynn Mackey, Contra Costa County Superintendent of Schools. Lynn has served in this role since she was elected in 2018 and has more than 25 years of experience at the Contra Costa County Office of Education. She holds a bachelor's in English and a master's degree in educational leadership. Lynn, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Congressman DeSagne, for having this event and having me here. I really appreciate it. Mark is right. We have known each other for years, and he's always cared so deeply about education, and not just education in general, but also about our students that are incarcerated and our most vulnerable students. So those are the students at the County Office of Education, where I am the superintendent. That is where we serve those students, and Mark, the congressman, has always cared deeply about those students. So I do want to just give a little bit, I'm going to just give a little context. Is the PowerPoint up and working? Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to give a little context about Contra Costa County and our school districts in Contra Costa County. So we have 19 school districts, including the County Office of Education. So there's 18 traditional school districts, the County Office of Education, and 22 public charter schools. And then we serve about 169,000 students. And we also, in Contra Costa County, there's been an uptick in private schools, and there's about 15,000 students in private schools in Contra Costa. Next slide. Our 18 districts are very, very diverse in a lot of ways, and particularly in size. So we have from the very smallest district of just 69 students in Canyon to some of the 3 biggest districts, really large districts in our states, which is San Ramon, West County, and Mount Diablo, which have almost 30,000 students. And then all the other districts are just a wide range, everything from 1,500, 11,000. We just have a really broad mix of school district sizes in our counties. And then our charter schools are all single school charter schools. Next slide. And this slide just shows the diversity for our schools. Our student population has changed quite a bit over the years. We are majority Hispanic and then white, followed by Asian and African American. Next slide. And then the students that, when we talk about the impact of some of these the projections for the federal cuts, we're really talking about our most vulnerable students in Contra Costa County, or in the state, or in the nation, actually. So 59% of our students in Contra Costa County are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So they're living in that area of poverty. We have 22% of students that are English learners, 14% of our students are students with disabilities. We have 462 foster youth, and then we have an expanding population of students experiencing homelessness. And of those students, as you can see, it's about a little over 3,000. And of those 3,000, 162 reported that they were actually unsheltered, and 209 are living in hotels throughout the county, with about 399 living in some type of temporary shelter, and then the rest are doubling up, and that population is growing. And these are our, our most vulnerable students in that we really need to take care of. Next slide, please. One of the financial stressors that we're feeling right now is our ongoing declining enrollment statewide. Statewide, California has experienced a decrease in birth rates and also an aging population, leading to fewer school-age children. This trend is evident here in Contra Costa County also, and as you can see, we had about 178,000 students in 1920, and now we are at about 169 students. So we've had a slow decrease of students in Contra Costa. And we've also seen a little uptick of students who are attending charter schools, which in California, we don't have privately run charter schools. So they're all public schools that fall under the umbrella of the Department of Education. So we've had a little uptick of our charter schools, and then we've gone from about 8% to 9% of our students in private schools. Next slide. And this slide just shows, I just wanted to share kind of a little bit of data. Countywide, we always do, our numbers are low, but they're getting better every year. We always average better than the state. So we do a little bit better than the state. And so I just wanted to give you some of that background data. Next slide. Now, some of the, so let's talk about the federal trends and the things that were the threats that we're facing and that we're feeling and kind of being whipped around. It's been a very trying time of, federal orders coming out, and then lawsuits having to go after those federal orders. So there's been 7 executive orders under the Trump administration that directly targeted K-12 education. These include attempts to ban what they call anti-American curriculum, roll back protection for LGBTQ plus students, dismantle DEI efforts, expand the ICE efforts in our schools. And why many of these orders are stuck in legal or procedural limbo, they still signal the tenor and the tone of this administration and how they feel about our students and our young people. And while we're also seeing efforts to repurpose Title II dollars, and I'll talk a little bit more about Title dollars, but Title II particularly is supposed to support student or teachers who are going to work with our most vulnerable students, and those have been pulled back. And excuse me. This also comes at a time when ESSER funds, which are elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, those were those COVID dollars that schools got. So those are rolling away, and many of our districts had planned to expend the rest of those dollars in this upcoming school year. And the federal administration has blocked efforts for us to spend what was already budgeted and already approved. So we got letters saying we can no longer use those funds. And then IDEA, or the funding for special education, continues to be funded well under the level needed to support students in our nation. So we've always been really underfunded. We've never been fully funded. And I always appreciate that the congressman did try to get a bill through to fully fund special ed. It did not go through, and we still are at a very low rate. To make things more challenging, the Department of Education, though they have not closed it, it's with such a reduced staff that it's going to be challenging to get the support and oversight that we typically need. Next slide. So what's coming down the pike from Congress is just as concerning in what's already been enacted. The reconciliation bill passed by the House includes 3 big policy shifts that would directly harm public education. The first, it proposes a federal voucher program along with $10 billion in tuition tax credits. That essentially takes public school dollars and redirects it to private school, leaving fewer resources for the majority of students who attend public schools. The second is the bill that includes cuts for Medicaid. This matters for K-12 education because we do a lot of work both in the mental health space and in our school-based services that rely on Medi-Cal dollars, and that would be a huge hit to public education. And the third is really that change to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistant Program. This would make it harder for schools to directly certify students for free and reduced price meals, which directly affects our Title I dollars. And it also is just bad for students and families. This could be, more paperwork for students or for families to try to get through. It would be less food on the table for families, and it's just really not good for students at all. So even though the bill hasn't passed the Senate yet, we expect deeper cuts to come in the 2026 budget. Republican leaders and President Trump campaigned on making major federal budget cuts, reductions, and we believe that they'll push harder to deliver on these promises. Next slide. So while federal funding in our county represents a relatively small portion of our funds, it makes up about 6% of our overall countywide budget. So we receive about 200 million countywide. Now, like I said, we're a very diverse county, so some districts get a large chunk of that funds, some get a very small chunk of the funds. The majority of the federal education funding comes through for specific programs. There's our title funds, which are for low-income students, for teacher and principal quality, particularly with working in challenging low-income districts, English learner support, student support and enrichment, rural education, and of course, IDEA, special education services. And just so you know, so right now, the special education funds are flat funded. We're supposed to get for this upcoming school year, the same amount. So it's not supposed to take a hit, but in public education, just like in any organization, flat funding does feel like a cut because everything else, the step and column increases, things cost more. So it will feel like a cut. And we are still obligated to provide all the same services. So your students will still get all their same special education services because the law is not changing around special education and IDA. It's just the funding is being held harmless. And we're forecasting that it may be cut in the next school year. So IDEA, the funds or the laws that regulate special education ensure students with disability have access to free and appropriate public education tailored to their individual needs. And it is important to note that the distribution of these funds varies among districts, like I said. So we do have some, it just really is based on student count, student needs, student disabilities, and it really varies across. Now, in summary, what I really want to say, this isn't just about money. This really isn't just about the dollars. It's about the direction that its administration is moving in and how deeply troubling it is to see policies and proposals that undermine public education. From attempts to shift public funds to private hands, the erosion of civil rights protection to student services, and it just goes way beyond budgeting. It's more of a philosophy shift that is very, very concerning. We have committed educators in Contra Costa County. We have committed leaders, we have committed superintendents, and we are all here committed to continue to provide the best possible support for our students. And we really do need to fight to change the House and the Senate so that we have a voice and a say, and that we can change the trajectory of what's going on. So with that, I think that is my last slide. I just wanted to give you an overview of the county and how some of these policies might affect us. And we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you, Lynn, for your time. We appreciate you being here and that fantastic presentation. In advance of introducing our next panelist, I want to remind live viewers, whether you're watching, if you'd like to ask a question, please utilize this time to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you're watching on Zoom. Additionally, if you're watching on YouTube, live streaming through YouTube, please feel free to submit your questions through the YouTube comments. That said, we are also joined by Allegra Sarah Fisher, a senior policy attorney with Disability Rights California. Allegra's work focuses on public policy and legislative advocacy to advance education equity to students with disabilities. She also represents youth and families in individualized education programs and special education due process hearings. Allegra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you this afternoon, and really excellent to hear from the congressman as well as the superintendent regarding, what's happening in Washington, D.C., as well as what's happening in Contra Costa County, to kind of set the stage for us. And what I would like to do is speak a little bit about the organization that I work for, Disability Rights California, broadly, as well as specifically in the context of what the services that we provide and the advocacy we engage in on behalf of students with disabilities, not only in Contra Costa County, but all across the state. So Disability Rights California is the protection and advocacy organization for disabled individuals in the state of California. Every state has a protection and advocacy organization, and these organizations are tasked with ensuring that all of the institutions and community organizations that serve people with disabilities are essentially doing a good job, are providing appropriate supports and services so that people with disabilities can live their best lives in community, in their local communities, to the extent possible for each, unique individual. And so in the context of education, the services that we provide and the advocacy that we focus on is very much intersectional in the sense that we provide services to parents and students with disabilities, but we also look at kind of the broader context of education in our communities and the various elements that make a school community an equitable place for students with disabilities to be able to be educated with their peers in the least restrictive environment possible for each individual student. And so some of the services that we provide center around crafting good, strong IEPs. An IEP is, that's the abbreviation for individualized educational programs. And so each student who is eligible will have a specific plan with services and supports that are designed to address their unique needs and enable them to thrive, again, in what's called the least restrictive environment for them. So often we advocate for students with disabilities to be able to be educated in classrooms with their non-disabled peers, and then to have sort of scale up services and supports from there. And so when needed, we will represent families in filing either complaints, whether those are civil rights complaints, with the Federal Department of Education, which has become more challenging lately. I'll touch on that in a moment. Or whether that's with the California Department of Education, or filing due process complaints, to be able to hopefully reach an agreement with their school district or county office of education, to put in place the appropriate supports and services for students. In addition to that, we do, in some instances, file lawsuits when needed regarding disability discrimination or other types of discrimination that are occurring at the same time as disability discrimination, either in a very wide variety of settings. And the great thing about my position is that I do some direct services, some direct legal services, but I also get to do a fair amount of public policy advocacy. And so the main issues that we look at, both at the state and the federal level, again, are going to be issues of disability discrimination, issues of ensuring that our students have access to mental health supports and services, as well as we look closely at school discipline and the ways that our districts are hopefully moving towards a more restorative approach to school discipline to try and stop what we refer to as that sort of school to prison pipeline that unfortunately is a factor in the lives of many students across California. And so we always encourage districts and educators to take a more holistic approach and really sort of diversify the ways that they intervene with students to allow them to, be a whole person at school, receive all the services that they need, and get the support to really be able to thrive as students. And the superintendent, as well as congressman, did a great job of speaking about some of the really big issues that are facing the education system right now. Our organization, Disability Rights California, is focused largely, and it's great to hear, focused largely on a lot of those same issues. One of the big pieces, as a congressman mentioned, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA. We have been advocating for many years to expand funding for those services for students with disabilities, not only in California, but across the country, right? And one of the things that we want to make sure does not happen is that we want to make sure that, while we're still pushing for additional funding, we want to make sure that we at least say where we're at right now, right? We want to think big. We want to push for more funds, but we want to make sure under the current administration that we at least say where we are. The other thing is that this administration, unfortunately, has cut some of the civil rights enforcement mechanisms. The Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education, half of those offices have been closed. And so this has unfortunately cut off or made long wait times even longer for individuals who are trying to get relief for disability discrimination for their students. So we are in touch with the congressman's office and with others who are trying to make sure that these protections stay in place for students with disabilities across the state. I believe there is one slide. We can either show that now, or I can place the contact information into the chat if that works better, because I'm sure there are some pressing questions that we want to get to. But we wanted to just share, thank you so much for sharing that. We wanted to just share our contact information, the number that is on the screen. I'll read it quickly, 800-776-5746. This is our intake line. And we also have here the link as well as a QR code that you can scan with your phone if you're able to our Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. This is one of the items on our website that gets the most views, the most hits, and it's a really comprehensive guide regarding what services and supports are available, as well as rights of students and parents in the education process. So I will leave it at that and happy to answer any specific questions that there may be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for presenting. And now we'll move on to the question and answer section of our town hall. As a reminder, just repeating, if you've not yet entered your question into the Q&A section, for those attending on Zoom, please feel free to do so. If you have a question, we're going to get to as many questions as possible. But as always with these town halls, traditionally we're not able to respond to everybody. That said, if we have your contact information, we will also respond to you after the town hall if we did not get to your question. Additionally, those watching on YouTube, please submit your question through the YouTube comments. That said, let's go ahead and get started. This question is from an anonymous Zoom participant. I have a family member who receives specialized education in grade school. Will these services be affected by the budget cuts to education? If so, when, what, and how?
If I could start with that and then turn it over to Lynn. And I do want to, before I start with it, just say, since I'm sometimes technologically impaired, if I was being rude when Lynn was talking, I was trying to look at some of the questions on my phone. It wasn't playing Pong or anything, so I apologize for that. On this, almost certainly, given what we've heard, the disruption in all the departments, but particularly in the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, will hurt our delivery of services. And as everyone said, the original IDEA, I think you will correct, both of you will correct me if my memory's not correct, was supposed to pay at a much higher rate, as you both mentioned, for disabled community. And I think it was 40% was supposed to come federal, and the highest it's ever been is 10 or 15, and it's below that now. So correct me if I'm wrong. But when you cut these professionals who work there, and this idea that they're just mindless bureaucrats collecting a paycheck is just not the truth. We've got some wonderful, dedicated people, and frankly, I think they're underpaid as part of the problem. So now there's even more pressure on them because they don't have the resources, even with the courts saying that what he did was illegal and reinstating the department. As Allegra mentioned, the disruption, as you can imagine, of the work life and the fact that people are no longer working there, even with all of our work to protect them, is got to have an effect on a department that's already understaffed and underpaid. Lynn?
Well, on a classroom level, it should not. It should not. We are required in the classroom to fulfill your grandchild's IEP. So it should still, it will just put more pressure on the districts, more financial pressure on the districts. I mean, IDEA's never been fully funded, and we've never been able to say, well, we're not fully funded, so we're not going to fully fulfill your IEPs. So we are completely still required and want to, not just a requirement, but we will be serving all the students' IEPs.
Okay, great. Next question is from George. Who will support special education functions being returned to the Department of Education? Trump's caused big doubt about the integrity of IDEA enforcement.
Well, my answer is everything we've done and will continue to do to say this isn't acceptable. When you're in the minority, you don't have a lot of power, quite frankly, in the legislative branch. So we have to work to change that, both by winning elections, but also trying to persuade Republicans who I know better to help. And we're getting that at least in public comment so far, on the Republican and Democratic side in the Senate. So you have to be strong and stand up to them, but you also have to try to work with people and try to get them to realize that they're wrong. And then ultimately, we have to elect a Congress and a president who reflects values that we care about, which is protecting this population.
Excellent. From Matt, until the end of 2026, Republicans will retain majority. What are the primary focuses of the Democrats to help keep the ship afloat during that time?
Well, I think I've already said this as being, um, I'm sorry, but lack of another expression, in their face, and be demonstrative about our moral and and ethical belief that what they're doing is horribly wrong, and then use the rule of law to try to overcome what clearly, in my mind, what we're seeing is people in the administration who don't believe in the rule of law the way we do, at least. So fighting them every way we can. We're in the minority, so as I said, but we're winning in court and we're working. We learned from the first 4 years, so we're better. In the first Trump administration, we and our allies won 78% of the cases when they did actions like this, both legislatively and executive order, and now we're at 94%. So we have an infrastructure that's working, but we can't be naive about what the motivations are and how we have to really fight for it. But elections have consequences, and if you don't have the majority vote, whether you're in a school board of 5 people or whether you're in the Congress with 535 people, it's hard. Now, having said all that, we're in a context right now that is very historic in its lack of respect for trying to reach across the aisle to us and try to work on things.
Excellent. This is from Sadiq. Do the restrictions on visas for international students apply to all countries or just a few countries?
I believe it's to all countries, but again, courts have ruled against what he's tried to do with that. So you read a lot about what he's doing to Harvard and other higher education schools. There are articles now that their next object is the University of California. I've been in hearings, awful hearings, in the Education and Labor Committee before this administration, when the Republicans had the majority the last 2 years of the Biden administration, where they brought the presidents of Harvard who had to resign afterwards from pressure put on them. It was just awful. And we just had a hearing on this as well, directed at higher education. So international students are important to higher education and important to the country around the world. And we should be proud of the fact that people come here and in most circumstances, they pay to help us be able to help with grants and student loans for not Native Americans, American citizens to go to school. So the business model very much relies on international students. And I would say there's plenty of research that shows that we benefit from the experience of these very bright kids coming to this country and getting an education here. We benefit financially, but we also benefit in terms of our image and respect around the world because the experiences these young people have at a formulative time in their lives in great American higher education institutions. I don't know if either of you want to respond to it as well.
I have a question for Lynn. Can the decrease in public school enrollment be attributed to the increase in private school enrollment?
Well, sure, a little bit. So it has ticked up about 1%. And also the decrease can also be we're aging out. We've had more students graduate than we've had coming into the system. So it's a combination of those things.
Excellent. Thank you. And I have a question for Allegra. How is DRC advising parents who have filed complaints with OCR and has not heard back, or if there's no progress on their cases? This is from Ava.
Thank you. Excellent question, Ava. So unfortunately, what we have heard through the grapevine, or to back up for just a moment, the Office of Civil Rights with the Department of Education, which is referred to as OCR, for California was in San Francisco. That office is one of a good number of offices that has been completely shut down by the administration, and all of the cases, from my understanding, have been sent to the Seattle office with no additional staff in the Seattle office. So a process that unfortunately, even prior to these cuts, was taking sometimes over a year. Now we are anticipating that it will take 2 years, possibly 3 years. And that's just simply too long to wait for any type of relief. So our general recommendation, and again, you're welcome to call our intake line, which I did place in the chat. But our general recommendation would be to, assuming that you are a California resident, if you're in this attending this webinar, that you would be able to file what is called a UCP complaint with your school district. And then from there, if you do not receive an adequate relief or response, then from there you can file a complaint with the California Department of Education. Normally, each of these entities, their complaint processes kind of covers different issues. But given that the Office of Civil Rights at the federal level, which really handles larger discrimination complaints, we just don't know what their capacity is going to be moving forward. We do want parents and families to still be able to seek relief. And so that is one avenue for, to try to seek alternative relief.
Excellent, thank you. This is a question from an anonymous Zoom participant. Is there any discussion by the Trump administration to make changes or eliminate the public service loan forgiveness program, which offers student loan forgiveness for doctors who choose to work in the public sector?
Yes, there has been discussion, and we've talked about this in committee, that, and it has been by my Republican colleagues for some time, is to either eliminate it or cut it back. There are Republicans who like the program and want to support it, but the general attitude has been that we should get rid of it from my Republican colleagues. And the administration, I believe, feels the same way. And I think some of that in the administration has been clear misunderstanding about the value of the program and its historical value, and the research that shows how much we get for having a loan forgiveness based on a commitment to, as you said, in that instance, be a doctor, a medical professional, and give time to public service. So we get more back than we give, would be the answer to my question. But for people who are strict libertarians, they don't want programs like that.
Excellent, thank you. This one's from Susan. Could you please discuss the proposed voucher system and that would how that would work and who it would benefit?
Lynn?
I have no idea, I'll be honest. I would imagine it's one of these things, I know it was proposed where it would like follow the student. It was like almost like a credit that you could take to your private school. I am not sure how that you'll have to take that money from somewhere. I'm imagining they're going to take it from public education, and we already need all our dollars. If anybody else has got more intel on that, please feel free to speak up. There we go.
There we go. Hand is raised.
I could provide just a brief response. So the proposal that is pending, I believe, in the Senate, or that has been introduced in the Senate, would create essentially what's being referred to as a scholarship program, but it's basically so I should say, full disclosure, Disability Rights California is very concerned about this program because it would divert tax dollars away from public education. And we know that public education best serves students with disabilities on the whole, because private schools are not covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So not to say that some public schools may not do a good job of serving students with disabilities, but on the whole, for the broadest swath of individuals with disabilities, public schools are going to provide the best supports and services. So this proposal that's pending would divert tax funds, tax dollars, right, by providing tax credits to individual families that have the funds available themselves to place into these quote unquote scholarship funds that they then can withdraw to pay for private school. And so the funds that a family places in one of these scholarship accounts, essentially, they can then deduct that amount from their taxes. So it's a little bit of tax accounting, a little complicated, but essentially, as the superintendent referenced, it does divert public funds away ultimately from, right, the large pot of money that would be available to fund education for students with disabilities in public schools.
Excellent. Next question is from David. I live in Contra Costa County, but tutor in the Oakland Public Schools through a program funded partially through AmeriCorps. Funding to the AmeriCorps has been cut. How is that organization funded? Is that connected to the education department funding? What can be done to restore funding?
Well, I think a lot of these questions, I would go to what Lynn said. Because this has happened so rapidly and out of the process, we haven't had a chance to really analyze them. And it was deliberate, in my view. Some people complain about how slow government works or how deliberative sometimes Congress works in particular. But the trade-off for that is you get more transparency and you get to understand. I've gone through the whole 1,000 pages a couple times now in the reconciliation. It's hard to read in the first place because it's a lot of legalese, but it's also more important in many ways to get professional groups and government groups to analyze it in addition to our committee staff to get the nuances of it. So on this specific question, AmeriCorps is being phased out. And I can't remember specifically where the funding comes from, which department. So I'll defer to either of you if you know the answer to that question, and we'll find out if you don't.
I believe it's through the Federal Department of Education, because I know that the notices for canceling came through the Department of Ed.
Thank you, Lynn.
We have time for one last question. This one's from Barbara. Why isn't anyone talking about early care and education? ECE is largely underfunded and underserved, yet without childcare, it's difficult for working parents to go to work. We already are very short on early educators.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. You're absolutely right. The only reason we haven't is because we've got an hour and we're trying to provide as much information as we can. Contra Costa County and Alameda County, but speak from the Contra Costa perspective, we've been very strong historically in trying to support early education. We've been ahead of the game in many ways as cognitive development that I mentioned, as we learn more about the neuroscience and how important early education is. So we don't spend enough on it. Contra Costa has a very robust Head Start program. I think the county is actually the biggest provider of early education, public education. And that's a tradition that I was part of when I was on the board, and we partnered, of course, with Lynn. So it's a great question. It's probably the most important thing in education. The rest of the developed world believes in high quality early education because what we've learned. Kids do better if they get better education earlier. And in addition, since our social model has changed in the last 50 years, 1973, only 14% of women with kids had full-time work. By 1994, it went from 14% to 74%, and now it's higher. And in California, it's very high. It takes two incomes, and we benefited from having that second income. The rest of the industrialized, developed world provided, Europe, the Japanese, provided much more quickly than we have, and still are way ahead of us on investments in early quality education. So it's a great question. We should take more time on it, quite frankly, and maybe we'll do a town hall just on that. But that's the reason. It's not because we don't want to talk about it. It's a priority for me. And I think it's a priority for Lynn and for the state of California. Multiple governors have been very forceful on this, and legislators saying we don't spend enough investing in early education. Lynn, you do a lot of this, so.
Absolutely. That said, Congressman, would you like to wrap up here?
Yeah, I do want to, first of all, thank both of you, thank everybody who showed up. but particularly for your careers and your avocation, it's so important right now. I'm sorry what you're going through, and we're going to continue to fight very hard to minimize what's happening, the delivery of services. Laker, thank you for the work you do. Part of what the administration has done, because we've been successful in the courts, they've tried to attack law firms, but also the funding for the services that people like Allegra provide for. So this is a massive war on everything that I think Americans historically have felt good about. And I will say there was one question I loved in there that said that Janessa didn't say, said something in effect, you seem so nice and collegial. Do you think that's the best approach right now? And I get a lot of that. And I agree with you. It's not. I can be extremely forceful and in my colleague's face, but I also believe in a quote by Abraham Lincoln in a similar period in our country's history where his Secretary of War, Chase, was saying you need to destroy your enemies. And Lincoln, towards when it looked like the very certain that the Union would prevail before obviously Lincoln was killed, he turned to Chase and said, do I not destroy my, so Chase said, you have to destroy your enemies. And Lincoln said, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? So it's a approach that changes. Sometimes you have to be forceful and in people's face. Believe me, I have been, but you also have to work with people. In order to get things done, I need to get votes to get them done, but I can't compromise what I think are horrible, horrible things that this administration and my colleagues are doing. So just in conclusion, I'm very proud of the fact that I've been told we have more town halls than any member of Congress. We'll continue to do them. We do them in multiple ways, so they're not always convenient for everybody. But I want to say this one I felt very important given my role in the attacks on education and young Americans in the reconciliation back. I mean, that was just passed last week. So I want to thank both of our panelists and all of you for joining. And we'll do more, particularly on this issue. But I just want to thank you all for tuning in and explain that we do a lot of these. And I know they're not always perfect for everybody in terms of timing or access, but that allows for our access being able to do it in other ways. And allows us to get experts like the two we have to be able to take time out for their day. And it's convenient and as accessible and in every way that we can. So I want to thank my staff as well. Any question you've asked, they will endeavor to answer them, and I will work on those answers. And we'll do follow-up Zoom and social media where I'll answer them and give you time to tune in if you want to, but we'll answer them all. Thank you all so very much. Janessa, you want to close it out?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman. The town hall will be available on our YouTube and Facebook page after the event. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your friends, please don't hesitate to call our office if we can be of any help to you. Thank you again for joining today. Thank you for taking the time to watch.